Mr. President, I want to supplement my remarks from last week with some insights from Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. He's an accomplished attorney and has been active in politics, and I make that point because he endorsed President Obama in 2008. So I think his comments might be particularly telling. This is not a good deal. As Mr. Dershowitz writes, all reasonable thinking people should understand that weakening the sanctions against Iran without demanding that they dismantle their nuclear weapons program is a prescription for disaster. How can Mr. Dershowitz label this deal as a prescription for disaster? He does so by pointing out the enormous difference between a deal that merely delays Iran's development of a nuclear arsenal for a period of years and a deal that prevents Iran from ever developing a nuclear arsenal. Mr. Dershowitz says that if this deal is meant to prevent Iran from ever developing the nuclear weapons, the president must clearly say so. And the Iranians must agree with that interpretation. That has not happened. How did we get to such a bad deal? Mr. Dershowitz says that the first mistake was taking the military option off the table when the administration declared they weren't militarily capable of ending Iran's nuclear weapons program. He says the second mistake was taking the current sanction regimen off the table by acknowledging that many of our partners would reduce or eliminate sanctions. And lastly, he says we took rejection off the deal off the table by indicating that rejecting a deal would be worse than accepting a questionable deal. Mr. Dershowitz writes that these three concessions left our negotiators with little leverage and provided their Iranian counterparts with every incentive to demand more compromise from us. He adds that our negotiators caved early and often because the Iranians knew we desperately needed a deal to implement President Obama's world vision and enhance his legacy. Mr. President, with this deal, might implement the president's world vision in the near term, I question whether it would enhance his legacy because I do not think it makes the United States or the world more safe. And I think we need a different outcome. I thank the leader for the amendments that he's put up that will make a difference. I think that one of those should have been done before any negotiations, and that's that the American hostages be released. That would have been a good starting point, and they should have then walked away several times to show that the deal was in favor of Iran rather than the United States. That had to be some of the world's worst negotiating.